Hey everybody, welcome to this week's live chat. I'm Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy, and it is Thursday at 3 p.m. Central Time, and that is the time I'm always in my studio talking live about quilting stuff. And so really excited to be connecting with you again. If you're watching live, be sure to chat your questions because Jessica's here. She's going to be writing them down so I can answer them live at the end. That way I can make sure that you have all your questions answered. And if you're not watching this live, no worries. Just leave your questions in the comments and I try to get back on there from time to answer them. So I want to make sure you have all the knowledge you need to be successful with what we're talking about. Before we get into today's topic, I have some winners to announce. If you watched last week's live chat, I had some pillow panels and I had 2 quilted pillow panels that I was giving away. Although, be warned, they're not bound. So you're going to have to bind them yourself, but make them into a pillow. Anyway, I've pulled the 2 winners, Mary Panikin and Kathy Cutso. So I'll be sending you an email or you can email me and we'll get those sent out to you. So congratulations. I love being able to give little goodies, little fun stuff. And there's just something about winning something free. It doesn't matter what it is, but if it's a giveaway, I want it. It's a fat quarter, pencil, doesn't matter. Maybe it brings out like the competitive side of me. I don't know. It's kind of crazy. All right, so today, this week's live chat, I'm going to be talking about long arm quilting, just giving some general tips for success. Now, I want to take just a second and say this is a little different than what I've normally done because for the most part, no matter what kind of machine you work on, the machine quilting process is pretty much the same. You're still going to make your design the same. It's just going to be a different mechanical movement. I normally show the quilting on a sewing machine for a couple reasons. 1, it's easier to film. There's that. And 2, there just seems to be in general, it seems to be easier for long armers to watch it on a sewing machine and apply it to their machine as opposed to the vice versa. So don't really dwell too much on the long arm, but I have to tell you that it's my first language. I went from hand quilting to long arming, so that's what I feel more comfortable with, but I do like quilting on a sewing machine too. So it's kind of like I can do both, but bilingual. What I'm going to talk about today are just general tips for being successful with it. I'm not talking about the technical bits, the practical parts, so just things to help you be more successful with it. And it's also very generic. I'm not limiting it to a type of machine. I'm talking about any kind of machine or any kind of setup where you move the machine and not the fabric. That is my definition of a long arm. So even if you're working with a sewing machine on a grace frame, you're still going to apply these tips to that. So I'm basically talking about a free moving machine, but we're moving instead of the fabric. So first of all, the main difference is going to be the movement, right? On a sewing machine, it's almost kind of the reverse. But other than that, there's a lot of similarities, but there are a few things that are different than a sewing machine. So I'm going to kind of spell those out. I know not everybody here has a long arm. Maybe not everybody here wants a long arm, but it might be interesting to see how it works and to kind of see it in motion. So hopefully you'll find it helpful and useful. Now, I do have some slides and some pictures to show, like normal. I'm a sucker for presentation, and I did put together a downloadable PDF of the slides I'll be showing you. So if you want to come back later, you can download that PDF and kind of refer to it. There's a link in the description box that will take you to all of that, so you can just click that if you want to. Definitely not required, but might be helpful. So let's get right into our slideshow because I got some fun pictures to show you. It's gonna be a good time, great time. First of all, I gotta show you where I started from. So this is Grandpa who taught me how to quilt, and this is one of the first quilts we hand quilted. So I, like I said, was a hand quilter first. I was not good at it, but the good news is I don't have to be good at something to enjoy it. So I would sit between him and Jeremy, and they were both really good at it, but I wasn't so great. But eventually, maybe I was just so bad that Grandpa took pity on me, I'm not sure, but he basically coerced my husband into buying me a long arm. I mean, we'll say it like that, but so he just said, if you don't buy her one, I'll buy it for her. So there's me with my very first long arm. My son was just 6 months old when I got the machine, and so he is almost 19. It's crazy to think how the time flies. I like to joke that if I had got my long arm first, I might not have children, but they were grandfathered in. So my kids have all grown up listening to the sound of the long arm. This is not the machine I use now. This is the first one I got. But I think the thing is you can do any of this on any type of machine, okay? So don't feel like, oh, if only I had this or if only I had that. You can do it on any. But let's talk about some like practical things. And this is an example, of an actual long arm. So if you're sitting there like, I don't even know what she's talking about, it's a long arm setup, or a long arm is kind of set up where the quilt is stretched on rails and kind of quilted as you go down. So it's a little bit different than just making your quilt sandwich and then moving on. All right, first of all, common thing is you want to make sure that your quilt, your long arm or your frame is at the right height. This is so important because as you're quilting, if you have bad posture, it's going to compound the longer you go. I like to say if you're quilting, the first thing that should hurt, if you're quilting on a long arm, the first thing that should hurt is your feet from standing too long. So you shouldn't have any back pain, you shouldn't have any arm pain or wrist pain. So how do you know if you have it the right height? Well, basically, you want to be able to hold on to the handles and not have to bend down to see the quilting. You want to be able to see right at that needle. That's the most important thing. So you kind of almost want it high enough, so high, but it's where you can still see that needle. So you're going to have to kind of play with that. If you have your machine already set up, chances are you can adjust it, or you can get a seat or something to help you out with that. So if it's too low, you're going to be prone to bending over. Unless you're like really good at having proper posture. I know that I'm not, so I don't have mine too low. But if it's too high, it's also going to be harder to reach and kind of see the quilting. So you just want to kind of have it in that sweet spot. And again, you shouldn't have any shoulder or back pain. And so that means even if your machine is set up at the correct height for you, you don't want to bend over. I'm kind of guilty of that sometimes, so I would get real intense and kind of staring at it. But you want to make sure you keep your back nice and straight because you want to have a good time. So I snapped a quick picture. This is at our quilt shop with a handy quilter. If you stand at your machine, in general, your arms should be slightly elevated. Your hands should be from your elbows. So at least parallel to the floor, but even up a little bit more. And so that's usually the gauge that we use when we're setting up machines. We'll kind of have them hold onto the handles, and that's a really good kind of gauge for that. Again, if your machine is already set up, it's worth the time to go ahead and adjust that height if possible to make it more convenient for you. And I will say, in general, this is only my opinion, so you have to take it for that. I'd rather it be too high than too low. So when in doubt, go a little bit higher because then you won't be able to lean over because you'll be hanging onto the bars. So very, very important. And it's just like the same as quilting on your sewing machine. That proper height, that proper posture is going to really, really help you be successful with that as you go. All right, number 2, this is so common, especially when I teach long arm classes. Obviously, I don't do that very much anymore, but when I do, we come in, this machine has such fluid movement. That's what's great about the long arm. It just kind of moves everywhere. So the first tendency is to grab those handlebars. And I get it, like that's totally normal. We think that if we just hold on tighter and we go slower and we stop breathing, that maybe the quilting will be better. And that's not the case. It's counterintuitive, but actually holding tighter doesn't do anything for you. You want to have a nice smooth movement. We want smooth, we don't want perfect. So it really can make you sore. So if you're quilting and you notice that your forearms, your back, your shoulders are tense, and your machine is the right height, it probably means that you're hanging on for dear life. And that's normal. Like when we're learning something new, that's everybody's tendency. That's just completely normal. So if you notice yourself doing this, the easiest thing you can do is just use your fingertips to quilt. It sounds crazy, right? But that machine moves so fluidly that you can just use your fingertips and you can't really clench your whole body with just your fingertips. So try to keep yourself in that habit. Now, I'm not saying that you should always quilt with your fingertips, but that will show you that you don't necessarily have to do the death grip on the handle. That's one that comes up a lot. All right, another thing that is very commonly asked about long arms is about the stitch settings. People ask me this all the time. Which stitch length do you use? What's the difference? So we're going to take a second and we're going to go into the different stitch settings that you might have on your long arm or your sewing machine. Now, this is going to apply to sewing machine quilters as well because you have some different modes if you have a stitch regulator option. Okay, so let's talk about the different modes. Okay, so basically, you're not going to know what the best stitching setting is for you if you don't understand the difference. So we're going to talk about manual or stitch regulated. But I have to say before we get into that, there is no like perfect setting. It's totally up to you and your preferences. In fact, some people switch back and forth between regulated and manual. I, myself, always quilt in manual. We'll talk about why here in a second. But there's no right or wrong here. I have long arm owners that start on stitch regulated and go to manual pretty quick. I have long arm owners that have never left stitch regulated. It's totally fine. I always say it's kind of like a car. You get into the car, you have all your settings, you have your chair just like you like it, and it will feel weird to somebody else, but it feels good to you. So don't feel like, oh, I need to do it like Angela does it, because that's not the case. Okay, let's talk about manual mode. So if you hear somebody say, I'm in non-stitch regulated, I'm in manual, what they're talking is when I hit that on button, that machine runs at the same speed, no matter how fast or slow I move it. This is the same on a sewing machine. If I push that pedal down, it's going, and the speed at which I move my machine or my fabric will determine my stitch length. Okay, so that means if I'm quilting in manual, I'm going to have probably organic stitch length, right? Some stitches that are longer, some that are smaller. That consistency will come with practice. So I won't worry too much about my stitches all being the same length, but it kind of depends on you. So usually when I tell people, oh, I'm in manual, the next question is, well, how fast are you running your machine? And you know the answer. If you've watched any of my live chats, you know it depends. It depends on the design I'm working with. If I'm quilting pebbles, I'm going to be quilting slower. If I'm quilting a design with lots of changes of directions, a little bit slower. But if I'm doing long, wavy lines, I'll speed it up faster. The main idea is you want to go fast enough that you can't critique the job you're doing while you're doing it, right? So if I'm quilting, sewing machine or long arm, and I'm quilting my swirl, and I'm like, oh, this swirl isn't looking very good. It's not looking good. I don't know. That's too slow. It gives me too much time to correct it. So I want to be like, I hope the swirl looks good because I've already moved on to the next one. But I don't want to be going so fast that I'm out of control and it scares me. So you're going to have to find that sweet spot for you, and that will come with practice, I promise. So what is the purpose of manual mode? Well, first of all, you get a smoother movement in general. It depends on the machine and all that. But when I'm quilting in manual, I feel like I'm guiding the machine and not so much as pushing it. So I get this nice smoother movement. And I love the sound. Okay, I know this is weird, but there's something about the stitch regulator, that machine, the motor revving up and coming down, that kind of is disconcerting to me, because let's be honest, I didn't learn with a stitch regulator. That very first machine you saw didn't have one, so I never had it to work with, so it seems foreign to me. So there's that. Now, some of the downsides is you're going to get that variable stitch length if you're not consistent with your movement, and you can't just hesitate. So if you're a newer machine quilter, or if you're newer at a design, you're not going to be able to just hesitate. You're going to have to hit that stop button if you need time to think. So what I did, I hope this will help. This is kind of different for me. I've put together just a quick video. So this is me quilting in manual mode. Even though I'm moving the machine slower sometimes or faster other times, that needle is going at a consistent pace. And so that means here, when I go into the swirl, my stitches are tinier, and as I come back around, they're a little bit bigger. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you're really, really wanting the same stitch length, you're going to have to get comfortable and consistent with the design, or try stitch regulated, which we'll talk about here in a second. Okay, so what's the takeaway? In general, I say manual is great for familiar designs, or if you're constantly outrunning your machine's motor. When I'm demoing on some of the machines in our shop, if I'm in stitch regulator, which is great because I can pause and talk, sometimes the motor is not powerful enough to keep up with me, so it beeps at me. So if you find that you're consistently outrunning the motor, like it's a smaller machine, you might want to try manual. Or if you're working with designs that need smoothness, like swirls or feathers. Sometimes I'll have people say, no matter how hard I try, I can't get those round swirls. They're more squared off. They're square swirls or squirrels. I usually say, if you tried everything else, try a manual, because there's just something about getting that smooth momentum down. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, so if we have manual, and then we're going to go to the other side of that rainbow, we're going to have stitch regulated. Now, most people kind of get the idea of what this is. Basically, as I'm moving the machine, the motor is going to speed up and slow down as my quilting movement varies. So if I go really slow, it's going to go slow, and if I go faster, it's going to go faster. And that's going to give me that beautiful, consistent stitch length. So that's what we're going to get there. What's really nice is you can set that desired stitch length based on whatever design you're working on. In general, I tell people 10 to 12 stitches per inch is good. That's what usually I tell newer long armors. And if I'm working like, let's say, a pebble, tiny pebbles, I might make more stitches per inch so I get a nice tighter circle, as opposed to the longer stitches for the longer designs. So the pros, of course, you can have that uniform stitch length, and you can pause and hesitate while you're quilting. So if I'm learning a design, I can pause and think through the next step. If I'm working with a ruler, or if I need to demo and show somebody and be able to pause, that's going to be nice. Again, the sound is a little distracting for me, nothing that a pair of good headphones can't fix, but also sometimes people have a hard time getting that smooth movement down. So those are kind of the two bits there. All right, so here I am on the stitch regulator. So as I go a little slower, that machine slows up, and as I go faster, so I'm not pushing any buttons. This is just the motor changing speed with the movement of it. So pretty cool if you're newer to machine quilting. And again, you can set those stitches for whatever you want it to be. All right, so what's the takeaway with that? I suggest newer machine quilters, whether it's sewing machine or long arm, if you have a stitch regulator, use it. It's going to help you out. It's going to give you like some time to hesitate and pause. And so I always tell my new owners, you know, start out in stitch regulated, 10 to 12 stitches per inch in general. You can definitely do what you want, but that's going to give you the best bit there. Or if you just like being able to take your time and be able to think through the design. So like I said, every design is, or every setting is individual. So don't feel like you have to fit within that little bitty bubble. All right, now some machines have something that's kind of in between the two, and on Handy Quilter it's called stitch regulated cruise. And so I'm going to talk about that. If you have a long arm that doesn't have that function, then just, you know, enjoy the next couple minutes. So what is cruise? Cruise stitch regulated is like a combination of the two. So if I have my manual and my stitch regulated, that cruise function is going to be in between. Basically what that means is when the machine isn't moving, it's still going to quilt very slowly. The reason being, when I go to continue on, I don't have to give it such a push to start quilting. So as I move the machine faster, the stitch regulator will take over and it will start stitch regulated. This is something that's hard to demonstrate. It's hard to understand until you get your hands on one and you feel it. But the idea being, if I was going down a road full of stop signs and I didn't want to come to a full, complete stop at each one and give it gas to go to the next one, I'm just going to kind of cruise through those. It's just going to help the transition from starting to stopping be a little bit smoother. This is mostly, I think, for machines that don't have quite as powerful motors. If you have a bigger machine with a more powerful motor, it can jump right in pretty quick. Or it's great if you want to like transition from stitch regulated to manual. If you're like, I kind of want to do manual, but I don't want to leave this behind, you can kind of use that cruise function. Because that slowest speed you can actually set or adjust. So I can adjust where it goes really slow, or I can adjust where it goes a little bit faster. So again, it's just another setting on the machine. And I did take a video. You're just gonna have to kind of trust me here. I'm recording, I'm moving the machine, but as I stop, see it's stitching really slowly and then going right into it. So the idea being it's just a nicer transition between the two modes. Again, totally up to you. So what's the deal with that? The most important thing is if you're doing designs with lots of changes in directions. So if you have that, also it's going to really help you. All right, hope you're thinking of your questions because we're getting towards the end of this presentation, so make sure to type those out because Jessica's writing them down. A lot of papers you got over there, Jessica. I told her, I said there's probably going to be a lot of questions. All right, number 4, totally common. When you're quilting, you have your most control with your arms in front of you. See, on a sewing machine, we can't really have our arms go too far from us because we're kind of right here. But on a long arm, what happens is we start quilting and we don't move our body and our arms are now moving on without us, and we need to not do that. So as you're quilting, you're gonna do what I call kind of like the Longarm Shuffle. I'm just gonna take little side steps as I move. So just try to be really mindful of that as you're quilting, especially if you're learning a new design or you're learning rulers or something. You're just gonna have your best control right here, right in front of you. So don't get into that habit of moving it on because that's not going to be very helpful. This is something that's a habit that you'll develop. So if you're newer to long arming, go ahead and develop it now. If you're not, go ahead and try to develop that, and you'll be more happy with that. You'll have that better control. I think sometimes when we're learning a new design, that's stressful enough, but then when we throw on top of it not having the best situation for the quilting, it's not going to make it end too well for us. All right, and then the last one is, this is kind of like a very vague overview, and I get it, like understanding thread tension. So one of the number one things I think that newer long armor quilters, or really anybody that's newer to that, are scared about the tension. Like what happens if the tension goes out? How do I fix that? Well, the thing is, especially on a long arm, we're moving that machine in so many different directions and we're putting stress on that needle in so many different directions that one little bitty thing, if one little bitty thing is off, then it's going to make the tension be off too. So let's talk, kind of understand it, and I'll give you some generals. Basically, the idea is we want that top thread and that bottom thread to meet in the middle of the quilt, and that is perfect tension. If it doesn't meet in the middle, then it's not perfect tension, and that's not a whole lot of wiggle room. It's pretty thin. So first and foremost, if you have a long arm, and this is the same for a sewing machine, use high quality machine quilting thread. You can skimp on fabric, you can skimp on other stuff, just don't do it with the thread. Because remember, we're going in all different directions. If that thread isn't strong enough, it's gonna fray and snap no matter what you do. So make sure whatever thread you get is for machine quilting. And then the proper needle size, very important. So if you have a long arm, check with your manufacturer to have the needles, and you can look at that. Basically, You want to make sure it's the right size for the thread so that you don't have any shredding issues or breaking or snapping. Just having that right stuff set up from the beginning, right, will really help prevent a lot of frustration. But the problem is sometimes things happen. I remember when I learned how to long arm, I mean, I would feel like all of a sudden I come down and it's not working, like the tension's off. And I'm like thinking, what happened? It was fine yesterday. The idea is if your machine is having thread issues, whether it's tension, breaking thread, shredding, anything like that, the good news is it's probably one little small problem. The bad news is it could be one of 100 problems. So as you're problem solving, make one adjustment at a time. This is probably the thing I always did wrong now that I look back at it. I would adjust 4 or 5 different things and then test, and then 1, if I did fix it, I wouldn't know what actually did it, and 2, I might be making more problems for myself. So a perfect example, sometimes I would tighten the top tension and tighten the bobbin. Well, if I knew how thread tension worked, I would realize that's changing nothing. It's just making the stitch tighter. The tension is not changing. So the idea being you have to kind of work through one thing at a time. If you're adjusting something and it's not changing anything, it's probably not the problem, so go ahead and stop doing that. I know it's frustrating. Reach out to your dealer, reach out to your friends, reach out to Facebook, and just get help. I promise it can be fixed. I know that's one of those things that I always tell my owners. I'm like, you're going to be good for about 3 to 4 really good freakouts over the thread. Like, you're going to have a moment, but we'll talk you down. So just know that you'll figure it out and it will work. And there'll come a moment where all of a sudden you don't have problems with it anymore. I will say if you can move that machine as smoothly as possible, even if you're in stitch regulated, that's also going to help as well. So again, I know that's very like overview. I was joking with Jessica, I was like, I'm going to teach them everything they need to know about long arming in 20 minutes. Well, that's just not going to happen. There's a lot there. But if you can kind of stick to these things, that's really, really going to help. All right, if you don't have a long arm and you want to learn a little bit more about it, I've put together like a Zoom presentation all about long arms. If you're interested in that, there's a link to the description box below for that. It's going to be February 2nd. And basically I'm going to talk a little bit more about the specifics, the different kinds of long arms, how to decide which long arm is great for you, things to ask when you're buying a long arm, and then I'll also be answering your questions live. Answering your questions there in the class. So to make sure that everybody gets that interaction they need, I'm limiting it to 30 students or 30 attendees. So if you want to do that, I would go ahead and jump on there now so that I can give you more specific things about long arming, because I know can't really hit that in a 20-minute talk. So, all right, so let me come back here. I did write down a couple questions that came up through the text chat before we started. I love getting on to the video about 30 minutes before we go live and interacting with everybody. We have a good old time. So Judy asked, how do I decide which way to load the quilt, horizontal or vertically? It depends. Don't you love that? First of all, when I'm trying to decide how to load the quilt, I look at the backing. If there is a seam in the backing, I try as hard as possible to load that seam so it's parallel to the bars. That's going to make it easier as I progress through the quilt. You can do it where it's perpendicular, it's fine. It's just going to build up in one spot and make the backing not lay quite as flat. You just got to watch out for those tucks when that's the case. If at all possible, I try to load it sideways because that's a little bit more efficient to quilt because I can do more within one pass. But it also depends, maybe the quilts are on point, or maybe it just is easier to quilt it vertically. It totally depends. Maybe I don't have space to turn it horizontally, or maybe a design that I'm quilting is directional, especially if you're doing pantographs. This would be a perfect example. Pantographs are usually plotted horizontally, so turning your quilt might make the pantograph look weird. So those are the couple things I think about when loading the quilt. And then Sharon just said, could I quickly talk about the pros and cons of stand-up versus sit-down? So like I said, when I talk about long arming, I'm talking about moving the machine. There are sit-down long arms, but we're still moving the fabric there. So a lot of the tips that I give for sit-down or quilting on a sewing machine are applicable to that. The pro of standing up is that you're moving the machine and it moves easier and quicker. There's less pressure on your shoulders because when you're working on a sewing machine or even a sit-down long arm, you're doing the smush and push, what I call it, right? You're wrestling this quilt, and then on a stand-up, you're moving it's a lot freer movement, so there is that. However, some quilters don't love that freedom of movement. Some quilters want to sit down, they want to put their hands on the quilt, they want that, and so that's the main difference. Also, some people can't stand for long periods of time, so if that's the case, maybe a stand-up long arm wouldn't be for them. So it really just have to kind of find what works for you. All right, so any questions there, Jax? Those are the only two I wrote down, but just a few. Ooh, we got a whole stack. All right. Any suggestions on long arms for first-time buyers or users? Oh, that's something I can't really answer in a quick question because it really depends on, it's like buying a car. Like, which car should you buy? There's a lot of models out there. I should specify, I am a Handy Quilter dealer. I've been using Handy Quilter for almost 10 years, and then when we opened our shop 6 years ago, I knew I wanted to be a dealer. But I think, it's not just what type, it's the brand that you want. It's also if there's a dealer that's going to be helping you. So there's a lot of things to think about. The best thing I would say is just do a lot of research. Do a lot of research, and if possible, if shows open back up, please God, let shows open back up. You can go to some quilt shows and try out all the machines. It can really help you. All right, how often should I change the long arm needle? Oh, I love this question. So Jeremy, my husband, is our Handy Quilter tech, so he does all the technical fixing and all that kind of stuff. And this is something we disagree on. So according to Handy Quilter, you should change your needle every quilt or every so many hours of quilting. You have to check with your manufacturer and see what they say. I'm not good at changing my needle that often. I will tell you, if you have hit something or if you quilted a quilt with really bulky seams, go ahead and change out your needle, because even if it doesn't feel dull, it could be dull just enough that it's going to give you poor tension. So if you're having any trouble at all, go ahead and change that needle out. One of my long arm owners, Tina, she's genius. One thing that she does is when she changes her needle, on the side of her machine, she writes with a dry erase marker the date she changed it and the needle that's in there. I thought that was pretty helpful. So how often should you change it? Whatever your manufacturer says. How often do I change it? Not near as often. Okay, any tips for learning how to long arm quilt when there's no class nearby and are not at a point to buy a long arm machine? That's really tricky, because you want to try it out before you buy it or learn how to do it. But if you can't try it out, then you can't. That's a tricky one. I would say anybody that can quilt on a sewing machine can quilt on a long arm. So if you're thinking, I can stand for periods of time, I have the space and I have the funds and I think I want it, I ask people when they come in, do you like machine quilting? I mean, is that a process you find enjoyable? Like, if you sit at your machine and you're like, I love machine quilting, I just get tired of wrestling my quilt, then that might be right for you. If there is no class around you, it might be worth flying to where there is one. I mean, it's quite an investment. I mean, when we got my first long arm, I didn't know how it worked. And when it showed up, it was the first time I've ever touched one. That's not really the best way to buy a long arm. Good thing it worked for me, but try to get to a show. I know Handy Quilter does an academy in Salt Lake. Try to find the closest thing to you. And even if it's to drive to a shop somewhere and try it out. But I will say, if you quilted on a sewing machine and you go to a long arm, it's going to be like slipping on ice. You're going to be like, I can't control this. Just know that control comes with practice. And of course, you'll know not to clench, right? You'll use your fingertips. All right, is it more economical to buy a long arm with the computer or without if you want to upgrade later? Okay, so the computer, we haven't even touched on that. So quilters, we have all the fun stuff, don't we? I don't use a computerized quilting. I like to free motion, but I know that some people love the, I would say, perfection or the repeatability that comes with that computer. You have to check on the brand that you want to get. Can you upgrade later? I always say, though, if you have a computer, it's good to know how to free motion as well. So you'll get the most results out of that if you can do both. I have owners that don't. They just do the computerized, and I have owners that just do the free motion. Both of them are fine. So if you're on the fence, I would wait and then just add later if you have that option. I always say that people that might benefit from getting a computer, it's usually people that want to quilt for customers right off the bat, and they don't want to have to necessarily take the time to learn how to do it, or their husbands just bought a boat. Okay, that's just a joke, but yeah, so if you're not quite sure, you can always add it later. But some people are like, yep, I don't want to do it. Other people do, so it just depends. I know that's not very helpful, but it's up to you. I have a Sweet 16. Are the extension tables worth it? So Sweet 16 is Handy Quilter's smaller sit-down machine. They have a bigger one, the Capri. I would say the extension tables are worth it, or something that you can put next to it to give you more space to spread out your quilt. Whether that's a folding table, I like the extension tables because they fold down and back up, but it's worth it if it's worth it. It's up to you. But at the very least, if you put that machine up against a wall or even in the corner, it will kind of block that quilt in. Because what we don't want happening, especially on any sit down, we don't want the quilt hanging, and fighting gravity is such a pain. So I'd say yes, or if you're like, I don't want to spend that much money, get some tables and put around it. How would I load a panel on my Simply 16, and how would I move it back and forward? Okay, so this is the one difference. So Handy Quilter does have a Simply 16, sorry, did I say sweet? Simply 16. And it's a long arm. You move the machine, but it has almost like a hoop. So you make your quilt sandwich beforehand. So that's the one example where you're not loading your quilt on the rails, you're basting it beforehand. So you're going to make your quilt sandwich like you normally would, whether you baste it with pins, whether you baste it with fusible batting, or whether you just slap the layers together. It's up to you. And then how you move it back and forth is you quilt the area and then you'll unclamp it and reposition it. So that's kind of how you would move around. So it's going to be a little bit a different experience as you work through the quilt, but the idea of moving the machine, all the things I talked about are still going to be the same. The benefit to Simply 16 is it doesn't take up as much space, and you can still do a quilt on a larger scale. How long should it take to get comfortable on the speed? Well, I hope they're talking about the speed of the machine, not the illegal drug, but it depends. So as you're quilting, you're probably going to be able to go faster and faster as you get more comfortable with the design. So it depends on how much time you spend quilting at one time, whether you're doing the same design. It shouldn't take forever, right? You should quilt a couple quilts and start kind of feeling where that speed is. But I will tell you a natural tendency in classes, especially long arm classes, when I see they're quilting kind of slow, I'll come up next to them, I'll say, keep going, and I'll speed up their machine for them, push that button. But what happens is as the machine goes faster, then we start going faster. We start trying to match the speed of the machine, and that's not the case. We're trying to match the speed to your hands. I know that's not the question you asked, but if you do go faster or slower, try not to adjust how you're moving the machine. You're trying to match the machine to your hands. I hope that makes sense. It makes sense in my head, but sometimes I say way too many words and make it all confusing. How do I know if my frame is too high or too low? You'll know. Does your back hurt? It's probably too low, or you have bad posture. If you can see what you're doing, no problems, leave it alone. If it's not broke, don't fix it, okay? So if you're like, I don't know, it seems a little low, but I don't have any issues, stick with it where it's at. Don't change it. But if you notice like that you're constantly bending over, that you're constantly having back pain, then you need to probably adjust it. And if it's too high, you'll know because it'll be kind of hard to see and reach where you're at. So that's pretty much option. Do I have a video showing how to load the batting onto the quilting frame? I don't, but that is in my New Year's resolution to come out with more long arming videos that are specific on how to do that stuff. So, you know, it's on the list. We'll see. Which mode is best for ruler work? It depends. Love that answer. I always use manual all the time. Funny story, I accidentally knocked off the encoder on the back, so I just took it off. So mine doesn't even have a stitch regulator. One time Jeremy was servicing it and he's like, where's your encoder at? I'm like, oh, I threw it in a drawer somewhere. I don't know where it's at. So I'm always in manual. So that means that as I pause, I turn the machine off. So I'm hitting that on off button a lot. But if you're newer to machine quilting or you're already kind of set in regulated, you already like that, then regulated and precision will be the way to go because you can pause, kind of take your time and move your way along the quilt. So it depends, but those are the two differences there. Hopefully that helps. Are my high shank rulers safe to use on a long arm? Yes, they are. Most of the samples I do to show are done on the long arm just because it's quicker and easier. But yeah, so on the long arm, most long arms, there are a couple exceptions. Check with your manufacturer. You're going to want to use a high shank ruler because most long arms have a kind of bouncing motion, and if it's too thin, it'll slide under that foot. Your needle hit the ruler, it'll break the needle, break the ruler, and you'll pee your pants. It's just not a fun experience. So definitely high shank. Do I use a stitch regulator when using a machine not on a long arm? I don't. So my machine, I use the Handy Quilter Stitch sewing machine that doesn't have a stitch regulator, so I don't use it there either. If you looked at it and you're like, oh, but look how consistent her stitches are. I mean, I'm imagining that you're thinking that. Maybe you're not, but that just comes with practice. Consistency comes with practice. And I'll leave you this one last little kind of like anecdote about that. When we learn how to write our letters, right, we write them all different sizes. And then as we learn, we start refining, and now we can write our name somewhat the same size all the time. If you ever go to sign your name on a line, have you noticed it always fits on the line? Same thing with quilting. As you get more comfortable with these designs, you'll be able to keep it consistent. So don't feel like, you know, you have to be worried about not having a stitch regulator, but if you have one, you can definitely use it. It depends. Try both. See which one makes you feel less like throwing up and go with that one. So again, I know this is a very kind of overview of long arming, but hopefully the tips will be helpful for you. And if you need a little bit more like deep dive into it, you want to learn a little bit more about the types and how they work and all that kind of stuff, check out that Zoom class. Again, it's limited space, so don't hesitate on that. Now, next week I'm going to be back. We're going to revisit feathers. When I get on the type chat, I let them pick what we're going to talk about. So somebody said they want to learn how to do those swirling feathers, those feathers that kind of branch off each other. So I'm going to get out my trusty whiteboard and I'm going to be showing you how to do that. So that'll be next Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. Until then, everybody stay safe, have a great weekend, and I'll